Today we arrive at a major climax in the narrative before us. We have anticipated this moment and its outcome for some time now. Queen Esther has been making preparation for this moment as a means of rescue for her people through her personal intervention as the queen. Now keep in mind, we're studying the book of Esther through a series entitled For Such a Time as This. Today's study is rightfully entitled Stuck Between a Rock and a Hard Place. And our text is drawn from Esther chapter 7, verses 5 through 10. I want you to listen as I read the text this morning. King Ahasuerus spoke up and asked Queen Esther, "Who is this and where is the one who would devise such a scheme?" Esther answered, "The adversary and enemy is this evil Haman." Haman stood terrified before the king and the queen. Angered by this, the king arose from where they were drinking wine and went to the palace garden. Haman remained to beg Queen Esther for his life because he realized the king was planning something terrible for him. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the house of wine drinking, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Would he actually violate the queen while I am in the palace?" As soon as the statement left the king's mouth, Haman's face was covered. Harbona, one of the royal eunuchs, said, "There is a gallows 75 feet tall at Haman's house that he made for Mordecai, who gave the report that saved the king." The king commanded, "Hang him on it." And they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's anger subsided. Wow, what an ending for Haman. Who would have ever thought it would come to this early on in the narrative? A man who had it all going for himself now finds himself hanging from a rope on a gallows that he had personally overseen the construction of. The saying, "stuck between a rock and a hard place," that we get this study title from, traces its roots back to Homer's epic poem, The Odyssey. Now, in this particular poem, Odysseus must pass between Scylla, which is a cliff-dwelling monster identified as the rock, and Charybdis, a treacherous whirlpool identified as the hard place. Since that time, the expression has been used to describe a person who finds themselves confronted by a difficult dilemma and no easy way out. Definitely the dilemma King Ahasuerus finds himself in after Queen Esther shares the answer to his question. In verse 5, the king pointedly asked Queen Esther to tell him who had ordered the destruction of her people. It's evident, and even more so in the original Hebrew, that he had become extremely angry at the thought of such actions being taken against his queen, Esther, and her people. Esther's response was also emotionally charged as she declared, "The adversary and the enemy is this evil Haman." Now, upon hearing the news, the king reacted in a fury. He arose from where he was and he stormed out of the banquet hall and into the garden. He found himself stuck between the sinister plot of his vengeful second-in-command and the impending death of his Jewish wife. But the situation became even more complicated for him, knowing that he himself had signed the unspeakable edict into an irrevocable law. Stuck in this dilemma, the king was faced with finding a way forward when he was so locked into the edict that he had signed. What way forward could the king possibly find? The passage doesn't give us an indication as to what the king planned to do or say when he returned. Providentially, he didn't need to come up with an answer. As he entered the room once again, he found Haman illegally alone with Esther, and even more, Haman had fallen on her sofa in despair. Haman had now sealed his own fate by his ongoing foolish actions. And by these actions, the king was now fully justified in sending Haman to his death. The hanging of Haman became the dramatic climax to the personal portion of the Esther conflict. However, it did not end the situation that the kingdom-wide edict now presented. Because the edict was signed into an irrevocable law, the fate of God's people remained unresolved. The providential workings of God remained vital and necessary if we are to have a positive outcome to this situation. Now, something we can learn from this ongoing drama is that one sin left unconfessed will lead to another, which will lead to another, and so on. You see, Haman continued to allow his ego and his pride to drive him deeper and deeper into trouble. And the same can easily happen to each of us if we do not come clean before God regularly. Let me encourage you to spend regular time in confession before God. Search your heart, confess your sins to God, because He promises forgiveness. You know, Haman found his death on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. His story remains a very stern warning for all of us of the seriousness of unconfessed sin in our lives. May we heed this warning, and may we strive to live holy lives. Until next time.